Hello, and welcome back to Factorio Space Age. The game all about spending tens of hours designing, automating, and cracking the numbers for the most optimal build ever, only for it to be the worst abomination ever conceived. At the moment, we have automated 6 out of the 9 science packs, and have completed 2 out of the 5 planets. Standing on the third one right now, Gleba. Now before we continue from where we left off, I have to warn you that if you haven't watched the first video, you really should. I am not going to explain stuff that I've already talked about, and I would love the extra views. Thank you. Mwah. Speaking of views, I want to thank you guys for the support on the first video. I spent so long working on it that I started to go a bit crazy, and started losing hope in it. I was also expecting to only get like 50 views, so getting more than 1,000 has drastically fed my ego to an unhealthy degree. At the end of my last video, I asked you guys for some feedback, and the most common one by far was my shitty mic recording skills. And I agree with you guys, I do have ears. Unfortunately, I had to sell my mic so I could keep paying for my AI girlfriend.
Fine, I guess you are my little PogChamp.
So I'm gonna have to work some real magic with this old Logitech webcam from COVID. We're gonna pick right up from where we left off, right after I got one tap by the Stomper. The best thing we do right now is respawn, drop in our supplies, set up solar power, and leave this shithole planet. For some inexplicable reason, I loaded the save before going to Gleba, and spending 2.5 hours doing next to nothing on Navis. I don't know if it was the months of editing creating holes in my brain, or my body instinctively knowing how annoying spoilage was going to be. After wasting 20 gigabytes worth of storage, I fly back to Gleba and actually look at the agricultural puke green signs. Gleba is one giant swamp, and our goal here is to carefully cultivate the native flora, then mix them all together in a gruesome blender. Just like in Vulcanus, we need to hand mine some of the planet's new resources to unlock the beginner trigger text. So I slowly wade through the mush and harvest some iron bacteria. While I was checking what it was in my inventory, I noticed this bar at the bottom called spoiled time with iron ore being the result. As I watched the timer run out, the iron bacteria did in fact turn into iron ore. I shed a single tear as I figured out what this planet's whole gimmick was going to be. I kept searching for what I actually needed, which were these 2 different fruits called jelly nut and yamako. Luckily they have an hour before they spoil, so I take what I've got and go back to my starting area. On the way back I find a defensiveless pentapod egg, which I of course brutally attack with no second thought. It's just in my engineering blood. These pentapod eggs are actually half of what we need to make swamp science, but if it spoils, a baby pentapod will hatch. I'm not ready to be a father, so I abandoned it in the wilderness. Back at the landing area, I drop in my equipment, set up power, and some smelters for the second time. With the beginner trigger text I unlocked, I can make a biochamber. A biochamber is like a combination of an assembler and a chemical plant that runs on nutrients instead of electricity. Now I'm not too sure what was hinting at when they designed nutrients to be a pile of white powder. But I do know that I will need thousands of it to produce 250 science per minute. I can make some nutrients out of spoilage, which is what most materials here in Gleba spoil into. With some biolabs and nutrients, I can turn these fruits into jelly cubes and yamako mash. The only thing I can do with them at the moment is combine them together into something called bioflux. Bioflux is the other half of swamp science, but can also be used to make a lot of nutrients. I need more fruits, so I set up these agricultural towers. Each plant can only grow in these specific areas color-coded on the map. Since they aren't that far away and take like an hour to spoil, I can just use logistic bots to transport them to the base. Speaking of base, since everything is made in biochambers, every biochamber needs nutrients, and everything is on a timer and spoils into useless garbage. I'm like 99% sure that belt-based design is the best way to go. But even though I know I need to use belts, I'm still banging rocks over here trying to figure out how to weave them all together. Gleba is hard because every machine needs like 10 billion things around them, and on top of that, a way to remove all the spoilage. But thankfully, this doesn't come up again. I'm slowly starting to see the vision and getting on a roll. Gleba might actually take no time at all. It appears that Navis has run out of power. In the previous video where I said, so I uproot all the uranium processing and power plants and move them over to the east out of the way of future base expansions. Apparently I moved everything but the only single assembling machine I needed to power my entire base. And the cherry on top, I didn't replace it when I went to my uranium mine, I replaced the entire Kovacs design with a new one! I tried to use whatever remaining powers in the roboports to make a new train with all the materials needed to make the fuel cell production, and set up any kind of solar production, but as the radars run out of power, I can no longer see or control what is happening on the map. The bots did finish the train. and whatever power is being generated by the solar panels is instantly absorbed by the massive foundries, even after I cut the power lines to the area. Now I probably don't have to point this out to you, but this is quite the pickle. Not only am I now stranded on Gleba with no real production setup and can't ship in new materials from Navis, but I've also spent the last 10 hours massacring biters and spewing pollution everywhere. My only hope to get back to Navis is to get logistics belts and volcanists to bring me the resources I need to make a rocket silo, and the materials to launch a rocket from Gleba, then fly back to Navis and fix the issue by hand. While the bots are working on that, I might as well continue figuring out the design here on Gleba. Okay, so at the moment this is my basic layout. We need nutrients for everything, so we start off with this belt. One side is filled by bioflux, since that recipe produces the most, while the other side is filled with the spoilage one. Since everything turns into spoilage at the time it runs out, this is a good way to make sure the belts don't get deadlocked by an otherwise useless item. The inserter logic is simple but very satisfying. By having the output hand before the input, these machines will always power themselves before letting the nutrients out to the rest of the base. And since stuff can rot into spoilage while in the machines, it's important to have a way to get them out of the machines and into the spoilage lane. That's something you gotta figure out with every build on Gleba. So far I'm enjoying Gleba because unlike the belt based design I used in early game Navis, where it just ended and all I focused on was saturating the belt, since everything on Gleba is on a timer, it's really important to make sure that everything is constantly moving through the system. And if everything is always moving, then you can use splitter belts to filter out spoilage out of the line by using some output logic. I was pretty proud of these Jelly Bean and Yamako factories. Watching the belt loop around the machines is really satisfying, especially when stuff spoils on the belt or is taken out of the machines and gets filtered out at the top. We put the mash and the jelly onto the main belt, and down south is where the bioflux is being made. It is similar design concept wise, but longer since we need it for both nutrients and eventually for science. Luckily for you, Devio, the rocket silo parts are here, so we can go back to Navis before I bore you to death with all this nerd speak. Fixing the power is actually so boring since I already have a massive stockpile of 235. I just have to wait 20 minutes for the reactors to heat back up so I can fly back to Gleba. But hey, on the bright side, at least my entire base wasn't destroyed. Returning back to Gleba and looking at the base, firstly, it died because everything rotted while it's gone. Secondly, I can see that evil TrippyTippy's inner spaghetti slop structure is starting to take place. So I pruned back the useless spoilage splitters and moved the bioflux factory over and in line with the rest of the biolab prints. There we go. Nice and tidy. After kickstarting the factory back up, I noticed that the nutrient belt is starting to, let's just say, thin out. Even though I was excited to make a circular belt design, I thought the largest issue I had with my starter base on Navis. In the standard belt base, if the assembler stopped taking items off the belt because the output chest was full, then the line would back up to the splitter and effectively wouldn't be there until the assembler started to work again. But since we want everything to always be moving in the circular base because of the items spoiling, then every splitter will always be halving the nutrients belt. On top of that, when only one half the nutrient machines are working, either because there's no spoilage or bioflux, then the nutrient belt from the start isn't fully saturated. Which hasn't been an issue at all so far, since we only need a little bit to get the machines working. But now that I'm up to making pentapod eggs, the other item needed for swamp science, I need 30 per recipe. I'm probably making 30 nutrients a second for every other machine before pentapod eggs. But it's okay, it's not all bad. We can quickly hand feed these machines because we need more biolabs and pentapod eggs are needed to make them. But then the spoilage starts getting out of hand and the nutrient machines can't keep up. So I tried turning it into a car. I Alt F4 and don't open the game for 3 days. I can't remember why I didn't open the game for 3 days. All I have in my notes is a schizophrenic drawing from a Slenderman game. However, what I do remember is the light bulb in my head turning on for the first time ever. I can just design the base in editor mode. Not only do I have the genius idea to pre-plan my base, I also remember that I can use the Factorio science website to figure out how many biolabs I will need for 250 science per minute. So I need 6 biolabs to make science and then a lot of other biolabs to make the things it needs. Now the base at its core is pretty much the exact same. It still has the main bus that eventually feeds back into the spoilage area to get recycled into nutrients. But this time I've actually done the math to make sure I have enough bioflux and pentapod eggs for 250 science per minute. And I added way too many belts for nutrients. I didn't do any math. I just assumed 4 belts should be enough, and having 4 of each nutrient type feeding into this 8-to-4 balancer should be enough throughput. Also, instead of having the belts constantly spinning around the machines, I've decided to just have them stop with an inserter that will place them on the waste belt, because most of the time, the stuff closest to spoiling is at the front anyway. And not to stroke myself too hard, but I think this base looks clean as fuck. And it's way more enjoyable to design the base beforehand, since I don't have to empty the entire base in order to see if it works. So I load up what the Sigma, and I copy paste it in. I kept the eggs that weren't going to spoil, and the rest were tossed into the furnace. This is actually how I make sure I don't get too many eggs and have my entire base destroyed. A furnace at the end of the egg line, and laser turrets completely surrounding the areas that they are used in. Now that the build is complete, I can kickstart it off by filling the spoilage biolabs and adding in the requested chest for the fruits. Now I did design this base in a test world, and theoretically it should be optimal. The only issue is that I built and designed it. And for some reason in the testing world, I didn't test the base. But that's how you know I didn't just steal this design off Reddit. Spoilage inserters don't have filters, biolabs just don't have recipes, single long arm inserters are too slow for fruit labs, some things aren't powered, most bioflux is eaten by science so barely any gets turned into nutrients. It won't happen for a while, but eventually the 3% chance to make seeds will deadlock the entire base and killing it, etc, etc. But after banging out a few kinks, presto, a semi-decent base. And what's this? Why, it's our first couple batches of swamp science, of course, but making the science isn't a break from the Gleba bullshittery, because of course it also has a spoil time. Speaking of spoil, every now and then a couple of pentapod eggs hatch, which isn't much of an issue since they are surrounded by IDF-sponsored laser turrets. The issue is that the laser turrets pretty much drain the entire base of power. Now power is another thing I didn't think of when designing the base, so it already struggles off pure solar energy. So I'm going to use heating towers that so far I've mostly just used as a way to destroy excess materials. By the amount of time I've spent talking about Gleba so far in this video, you can probably tell I've been here for a while, and I was tempted to just ship in the materials to launch rockets since making the science itself already took a lot of brainpower I obviously lack. But then I remembered I'm a changed man. No, a changed engineer. Out of the 3 things that we need to launch rockets, we need fuel. And rocket fuel is easy to make in biolabs. It just takes bioflux and jelly. I'm already just incinerating these 2 things already, so I just reroute the belt and... Wow, look at that, we're already onto the next planet. Time short of supply, we need to condense tens of hours of footage. Welcome to Fulgora, a planet with never-ending lightning storms and suffocating seas of heavy oil with only small islands covered in trash from an ancient extinct alien race. I think there's a metaphor behind all of this, but 15 hours of Gleba gameplay has ironed out all the faults of my brain. All that I do know is that I've got to find something called a Fulgora Vault, which after some exploring is pretty much a giant rock filled with random materials and scrap. It also unlocked the recycler. I found this relatively large island and set up power using lightning rods and accumulators. This is the main power source on this planet, and lightning rods create safe areas from the aforementioned lightning storms. Then I start scrapping. Recycling is the main mechanic on Fulgora. By desecrating these ruins for scrap, we can salvage 12 different items with varying chances. The whole bit with Fulgora is that you can turn scrap into mid to high tier materials like red circuits or blue circuits, concrete, LDS, yada yada. And then recycle those ingredients even further if you need basic things like iron or copper plates. The rarest thing we can find tied with LDS is holmium ore, the unique metal to Fulgora. Since it only has a 1% chance on scrap, I set up this bot-powered factory with bots crossing a small distance to the scrap outpost, depositing scrap in the requested chest, and then taking all the items out and stored it by using a purple active provider chest. I set up this very basic holmium processing area just to test it out and see how the science recipe flows. We turn holmium ore into a solution with water and stone in a chemical plant, then turn the solution into plates in a foundry. Making our first plate unlocks the electric magnetic plant, which we need for pink science. I don't have any refined concrete here, so I shipped some in, but looking back, I had literally everything to make it right next to me. To unlock the science recipe, I have to make a supercapacitor, which needs green circuits, holmium plates, batteries, and these 2 new things called superconductors and electrolytes. Electrolytes are another liquid that needs holmium solution, stone, and heavy oil. The superconductors are a little bit trickier since they need more basic ingredients like copper plates and plastic. Since I also need green circuits for capacitors, I set up this recycler to break down red circuits and use bots to move all the items around. And before I know it, we are slowly but surely making pink electromagnetic science. But of course this jumbled mess is not 250 science per minute scale, so while this is slowly working away, I start figuring out how to turn all the scrap into a functional base. I'm low-key waiting for that assembler to make 2000 pink science so I can research rail support foundations, because at the moment, I can't build tracks over the deeper, darker parts of the ocean. But I don't want to AFK, so I start doing what I can, which is designing the main scrap processing area. Since Fulgora is made up of mostly little islands, my idea is to use one of the few medium-sized ones to create a hub area that will process the scrap and then separate the items into their own trains. Then use those trains to transfer specific items, depending on the item's demand. Since this is already something I do at home on RVs, I wanted to use a different type of train network here, just for fun. What I'm doing here on Fulgora is something called a bi-directional system, which pretty much means that trains can travel both ways on one railway. In Factorio, train networks rely on rail stops. Train stops are used to create chunks in the rail network because automatic trains will not move into a chunk that's already occupied by another train. For example, in this basic circle, there's no rail stops, just train stops, as you can see by the fact that the entire rail is a single color. And when it's just one train, there's no issues. But if we want two trains to increase throughput, both of them don't want to move because there's no empty block ahead of them. By adding in some rail stops, it cuts the network into multiple different blocks, which lets the trains move again. I know this is boring, but I got to explain it so I can complain later. On RVs, I use a 2-lane system that mimics how roads work in real life. One lane for going one direction, and the other to go back. But by placing a rail signal on both sides at the same time, it allows trains to go either way. I used this technique before in Vulcanus for the double-headed train stop designs. There's also another type of stop called a chain signal. Chain signals are like rail signals, but they read the condition ahead of them. So if the rail signal ahead is green, the chain is green. These are used mainly for intersections. My logic is that since trains are going to be moving only once in a while, that throughput shouldn't be an issue. This is also something Doshington did in his Fulgora video, and it's really cool, so I wanted to try it out for myself. At the moment, since I don't have that research yet, I set up this wonky rail from the first scrap outpost to this medium-sized island. I have 3 drop-off points that support 2 lanes of scrap each. Since scrap takes half a second to process and green belts move 60 items per second, each lane needs at least 15 recyclers to drain the belts, which ends up in this behemoth. I used a 6:3 lane belt balancer and now I have to figure out how to sort them out. It was so hard and confusing that I forgot to hit record while I was figuring it out. So please just look at the finished design and validate me. At this point you can probably start to see why I need a whole island just to process the scrap. Because now I need to jam in 12 different train stops which all need ramps that take up a lot of space. I used the first 4 for holmium ore and rocket materials, then filled the rest of the island for the other 8. I check in on the Gleba base and I'm pleasantly surprised to see it on the verge of dying. These inserters and chests for the Yamako seeds are literally 1 tile away. So the first box filled up and stopped all mash production, which leads to no bioflux, which leads to no nutrients. Luckily enough, I did catch it before all the fruit spoiled, so I managed to just get it back up and running. Now with this 1-lane rail system means that for a majority of the network, only 1 train is moving at a time. But since I gotta use multiple different islands for different factories, that would really slow down my production. So I go back to the Dosh video so I can steal his mid-rail overtake design. The first thing I need to do is make rocket fuel. It's the one item I can't get out scrap to launch rockets, and I also need it to fuel up my trains. Because if one runs out in the middle of the track, it will deadlock the whole base. Even though I don't get rocket fuel out of scrap, I do get solid fuel and water. So I used the entirety of the small island to make a rocket fuel factory, train refuel stop, and a water train pickup. After the first load of ice and fuel, I noticed a small issue. The trains aren't coming back. The issue is that the scrap processing plant isn't processing. Looking back at the scrap recipe, the 12 different and possible materials we can get have different probabilities. Iron gears have a 20% chance, and since the iron gear train has nowhere to go, when it backs all the way up to the sorter belt, it stops the flow of all the other items. This is where I realized the real challenge of Fulgora. The monkey paw curled when I wish I had unlimited resources in the first video, because now it's raining metal gears and have caved my head in. So I've got to set up another area to break down excess products from scrap processing so I can keep the gears of the machine running forever. Get it? Gears of the machine? Like iron gears? For now, I make the small setup that just takes the iron gears and then feeds the plates directly into a recycler facing it, so it completely destroys everything. Now that I've unclogged one of the 12 arteries in this factory, I'm going to continue this unhealthy habit and just hope it doesn't happen again, like a fat guy after a heart attack. But I have good reason to ignore all that because we are already moving on to the main science production area. There's a larger island right next to where we make rocket fuel, which is handy because we need water to make the light oil for superconductors. Now we've already been through what we need to make pink science, we just need to scale it up. I don't really have anything new to say about pink science, so I'm just going to fill in the dead air by saying thanks for watching. I know the video isn't over yet, or you might have just fallen asleep, but at this point of the script I'm nearly 5,000 words in, and I know by the time I'm editing this part I might be tweaking out, so for once I'm doing something for future Trippy. Also, I have one thing to say. Look at how I've used these splitters to not only turn this belt of holmium plates into two separate ones, also by having the holmium only filling one side of the belt, I can then use the same belt in the superconductor build as the output belt. With this underground belt placed here, only the top half of the belt flows into it. And it doesn't matter that the superconductor belt is only half full because it fills the other lane of the holmium plates for supercapacitors. Now that the factory itself is done, all we gotta do is add in the train stops and see if the ratios are right. Oh yeah, that's right. I'm not producing green circuits or plates yet. Silly me. I know I just made that joke like 3 paragraphs ago, but Fulgora has just got to me in a recycling mood. Okay, I'll stop. The ingredients we are missing are iron plates, copper plates, green circuits, and plastic. Conveniently enough, we have way too many iron gears and cosmetic red circuits. There's no more space at the main scrap plant, so we gotta make a sub-recycling plant. Red circuits break down into plastic, green circuits, and copper wire. We can reuse the splitter sorting trick at the main recycling plant here. Easily route plastic straight down into the train stop. Same with the green circuits, while copper wire needs to get recycled again into plates. Since we are already recycling wire, we might as well add in a copper wire drop-off, and combine them into the same setup. And with the last spot, I add in blue circuits. Now blue circuits are prioritized for rocket silos, so in this drop-off point, I set the priority lower than what the silo one will be. Blue circuits break down to a lot of green circuits and some red ones. We can route them into the already existing red and green circuit lines, but since there's so many green circuits, I squeeze in a green circuit recycler with a splitter that will only send green circuits there if the green pickup is full. And just like that, the pink science build comes to life. All I've got to do now is copy the rocket silos from Davinci, adapt it to Fulgora by adding in ramps and elevated rails, and setting up the pink science train. Now, pink science is complete, but we aren't done here on Fulgora. Before I deal with all that, I use pink science to unlock tier 3 batteries, better robo packs, and a motherfucking mech suit, so I don't have to slowly wade through the oil oceans anymore. First things first, the scrap product lines keep backing up, but this time we have new contenders like steel, concrete, and ice. Good job guys, your prize is death. At this point, I'm sick and tired of something new popping up and choking out the entire factory, so every product here on out gets a new train destination called a trash plant. These stops have the lowest priority, and this is where excess materials get recycled into nothing. I'm really glad Web lets us use recyclers this way, because it would not be fun breaking concrete down into bricks and ore. Now these trash stops aren't that big since most remaining islands nearby are quite small, but at least they'll always be chipping away at the pile. My next problem is batteries. Batteries from scrap are tied with stone and steel at 4%. And at the moment I have no issues with stone supply, and a moment ago I had too much steel. I just thought it was because the recycling plant kept stopping and starting, but now they've got the trash plants and it's running smoothly, the battery supply still can't keep up. That's because I need twice as many batteries compared to stone, and they stack up to 200, which takes 4 times longer than stone. I also used the website to figure out how many scrap recyclers I need to supply enough batteries for 250 science per minute, and I have like half of what we need. But that's an easy fix. All I have to do is copy and paste the scrap plant and add in more scrap trains. There, problem solved. There's a small issue though. Between recordings, I think I developed dementia. The whole point of me making the second recycling plant was because I was only meeting 50% of the science plant's demands, and the first thing I do is copy and paste the science build. Yeah, I don't have an excuse for this one, chat. I need holmium and its products for future recipes locked behind the next science pack, so I thought it'd just be smart to take the science build and remove the science part and just put the materials straight onto the trains. I wasn't completely stupid though. I did make sure these train stops had a lower priority than the science ones, but like, why did I do this? The real issue with the Fulgora base at the moment is train throughput. Now when I started the train network, I wasn't ashamed to admit I stole the style from Dosh. It's a cool unique idea that could never work on Navis with how many trains I have, and there's a key point in that sentence there, viewer. Mini trains. You see, I stole the idea and style from a video, but I didn't remember how he used it. The trains at the North scrap plant are deadlocked, but not because the trains are sitting there with nothing to do. They can't go anywhere since they have to wait in line with about 30 other trains at this point. And even though I have heaps of waiting stations, there are so many trains now that these are nearly always occupied. And the trash stops I made are not big enough to deal with the amount of stuff I need scrapped. And this chat is why I have like 25 hours of Fulgora footage. To make a long story short, since there's not a lot of interesting things to talk about, I alleviated some of the throughput issues by having each scrap plant have their own enclosed train networks only for scrap trains, while they both still share the main system for product trains. In only 6,000 words and nearly 35 hours of footage, we have, mostly conquered 2 out of 3 remaining planets. But the third one, Aquilo, is a little bit more complicated. Firstly, it is twice the distance from Navis compared to the other 3. Secondly, the solar efficiency is so low that it's pretty much impossible to power a spaceship. And lastly, there are big asteroids that need to get blown up by rocket turrets. Needless to say, using the brick design that's been hard carrying since Vulcanus would be obliterated like a tiny tyke on a motorway. So gentlemen, it's time to create the slab. Now don't worry, the slab is an evolution of the brick. I really like the circular design of the ammo and asteroid chunks going around the whole ship, but there's 3 major changes we need to figure out to be able to make it to Aquilo. Firstly, power. Since solar will be useless that far away from the sun, the only real option is nuclear. Luckily, in my power plant book, there's designs for spaceships. All they need to do is place it next to the space hub so we can grab the fuel cells. The second issue is defenses. Like I said before, we need rocket turrets to destroy the large asteroids, which obviously needs rockets. One of the main things we unlocked with Swamp Science was advanced asteroid processing. I was hoping to use this to make calcite above Navis, but the design I stole sucked, so I deleted it like 15 hours ago. The real use for these recipes is this trip to Aquilo. The extra materials we get from the different asteroids lets us make explosives for rockets, advanced rocket fuel, and calcite, so we can use a foundry instead of furnaces. After some belt weaving at the bottom here, we are making both rockets and bullets. And using the splitter with a rocket filter, we're able to split the bullets and rockets onto each side of the belt. Up at the front of the ship we have a row of both bullet turrets and rocket turrets, and have the asteroid collectors in between them. The third issue is influenced by the first 2. We need all 3 asteroid types equally in order to keep the whole ship running, which is an issue because the closer we get to Aquilo, the less likely we are to find carbonic and metallic asteroids. Which is ironic because at the moment we are in desperate need of the ice ones, since we need water for the fuel, explosives, and most importantly, the nuclear reactor. Thankfully, we unlocked another technology called asteroid debris processing, which lets us take one asteroid and maybe convert it into a different kind. Now I will admit, I did steal this logic system from Reddit. Now it's time to go to Aquilo. Gleba. We gotta go back to Gleba. While I was on Fulgora, my Gleba base got attacked by the pentapods. Now at the time I didn't really care because I had already gotten most of the sciences I needed, but what I didn't know was that I was going to need carbon fiber to make rocket turrets. Carbon fiber is made with carbon and Yamako mash, and I assume they only did this to force me to go back to the swamp hole. On the bright side, I can take the slab out for a test run and take my anger out on the weak, defensiveless locals. I just need to kickstart the base and set up a single carbon fiber machine. Now with the rocket turrets locked and loaded, we can finally go back to Fulgora, because funnily enough, batteries and blue circuits are backing up. Okay, for real now, let's embark to Aquilo. Aquilo is hell frozen over. It's an ocean planet of liquid ammonia with only a few small patches of ice platforms. Everything is cold, barren, and painfully slow. For example, the first thing I did when I landed was set up a nuclear power plant, and spent nearly an hour just waiting for the thing to heat up. And when it did heat up, I realized I'm an idiot, because there's no water to boil for power. So I have to use some solar panels to turn on the chemical plant that's supposed to make the water for the reactor. But since Aquilo is so far away from the sun, it has a 1% efficiency. Luckily enough, I just need to make one lot of water and then the power plant jump-started to life. Power isn't the only thing we need to run a factory here. We also need heat. Since it's so cold here, literally nothing works. Which isn't a new concept for a TrippyTippy design, but at least this problem has an easy fix. Pretty much everything has to be next to a warm heat pipe in order to thaw it out. That's why the nuclear reactor was the first thing I set up. With the ammoniacal recipe to get ice for the nuclear setup, we also make ammonia as a byproduct. So I combine it with some crude oil and make it into solid fuel, which I then use in a heating tower to add more heat to the pipes. First things first, I make some cryogenic plants out of some of the lithium I got out of the big rocks when I landed. This building is different to the other ones from the other planets because it doesn't have an innate productivity bonus, but it does have double the module slots. I was a little confused until I checked the science website and 40 cryogenic plants for 250 times per minute, and to top it off, I've been here for less than an hour and Fulgora is already fucked again. I don't know if you can tell, but I barely have the space here for 20 cryogenic plants, not including all the plants I need to create the ingredients I'll need for the science. So instead, I'm going to be decking out 10 plants with max tier 3 speed modules. To make cryogenic blue 2.0 science, we need 3 oddly simple ingredients: ice, lithium plates, and fluoroketone. We already know how to make ice out of ammonia, so let's focus on the lithium plates. While there was some in big rocks when I landed, that was it. There's no ore patches to mine. We have to make lithium out of ammonia, lithium brine, and holmium plates. While I send the ship to Fulgora for holmium, I use the tiniest bit of ice platforms to bridge up north to these brine deposits and start pumping them back into the main area. Since I also need a lot of ammonia and ice platforms, I kill 2 bugs with 1 shell and set up this area to make both. And in the near future, I add in recyclers for ice platforms and an ammonia solid fuel production, so neither product stops the other from working. The ship has returned, so I drop into holmium and start designing a way to fit all 3 ingredients around the cryo plants while still being able to fit in the heat pipes. This plate setup is also going to be moduled so I can save some space. But while I was designing this, the power suddenly went out. Which was weird because I wasn't out of fuel or water. I'll tell you the reason why if you promise not to laugh at me, okay? Since every machine needs heat, I've added like 10 billion heat pipes off the reactor setup. What I didn't know was that machines drew off the heat pipes like they do a power grid. So by adding in all these machines to the heat pipe network, it brought the reactor below its 500 degrees threshold. To fix this very simple issue, I isolated the reactor to its own system and used the ammonia solid fuel recipe to heat the rest of the base. This took me like an hour to figure out. Now that lithium plates are done, next is fluoroketone. It is made up of ammonia, solid fuel, lithium, and fluorine. We can copy and paste the lithium setup we just made. Add some chemical plants over here that will make both solid fuel and ammonia. And just like the brine, we ice bridge over to some fluorine deposits and pump it up. There's 2 types of fluoroketone, hot and cold. And this recipe makes the hot stuff, but for science we need cold fluoroketone. So we're going to pump the hot stuff into another cryo plant that will cool it down. The science also makes hot ketone as a byproduct, so I set up these pump conditions so that we're always using the ketone from the science setup first. Now all that's left to make is the science area itself. Since science needs multiple items, fluids, and heat pipes for everything to actually work, this might be the most complex design I've ever made, more than the oil factory in Vulcanus, more than the pink science on Fulgora, hell, maybe even more than the entire Gleba base. All I have to do now is set up some dedicated ice machines, make more fuel burners for the ammonia byproduct, attach it to the belt, and just like that we've made all the science packs. Which is cool and all, but we haven't beaten the game yet, just the technologies to be able to. Blue Science 2.0 unlocks some cool things like biter captivity, foundations to build on oil and ammonia oceans, but what we need is quantum processors. Quantum processors is a late game item that takes carbon fiber, lithium, blue circuits, tungsten carbide, superconductors, and cold fluoroketone. Not only does it take a little bit of something from everywhere, it can only be made in space or on Aquilo. They are used to make fusion energy in railguns. 2 things we 100% need to beat the game. To beat the game, we need to travel to the edge of the solar system, which is 100,000 kilometers past Aquilo, And past Aquilo, there are giant asteroids that can only be destroyed by railguns. There's one small issue though. This base on Aquilo can, and did, make 250 science per minute, but we do not have the throughput of lithium brine or fluorine to maintain that number. I checked how many pump jacks I would need and it's like 40, and after some exploring around Aquilo and finding a few patches, I would still need to set up a major train network and make this ice platform much, much, much bigger. And I can't lie to you, I'm tired. I just want to make what I need to beat the game and start editing this video. If only there's a way I could get the resources I need without having to expand my production. Oh look, all the stuff I need to beat the game. How convenient. You can tell I've already given up because I don't even design a new ship for this final journey. I just took the slab, replaced the nuclear power with fusion, and slapped on 4 railguns on the front. I don't even make the railgun ammo in the ship, I've imported it from Navis. So let's name this ship Le Slop. The flight to the edge of the solar system is actually pretty boring, since the ship doesn't make nearly enough rocket turrets to sustain itself. If it moves too quickly, it'll run out. Also, if it moves too quickly, it will get hit by the asteroids. Since the density is so high, the ship doesn't have enough time to destroy them before impact. So it's like 30 minutes of me starting the ship manually, traveling 100,000 kilometers at 30 kilometers an hour. Also, I know it's a little late to mention this, but there's technically 2 different endings in Factorio Space Age. The short ending is traveling to the edge of the solar system, which is what we're doing right now. The long ending is traveling to the shattered planet, which is 5 million kilometers away. Trust me, I really wanted to go for the long ending. But I've been playing this game non-stop for weeks at this point, and to get to the level needed for the long ending, it would have taken me all of 2026 to make this video. See, look here, 160 hours to just do the short ending. I was literally gobsmacked when I saw this number. I can't believe this took 160 hours. So here's a compromise. I will come back and not only get to the shattered world, I will also scale up every planet to make 5,000 science per minute when this channel reaches 10k. For what I'm making next, it's going to be a video on a different game. Either the FPS game, The Finals, or the new Valve game, Deadlock. If you managed to stick around till this point of the video, please like and subscribe, it'd make my day. And if you have any feedback on the video, let me know in the comments below.